Tonight on Bridge City News, the Australian wildfires have killed millions of animals and displaced so many people. We have an update from a reporter with the Australian Broadcasting Corporation. We hear from Lethbridge Hurricane to get his reaction on his team, Team Canada, winning gold at the World Junior Hockey Championship in the Czech Republic. And BCN's Loris Alexander speaks to Lethbridge College students and staff about their New Year's resolutions.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Robbins.
Good evening. We begin tonight in Australia, where so many wildfires rage on. So far, more than 24 people have died, many families have been displaced, and hundreds of millions of animals are believed to have died, including many that are considered endangered. Teams on Australia's Kangaroo Island are having to euthanize livestock and wild animals suffering from burns. Australia's Prime Minister Scott Morrison has committed an extra $2 billion and dispatched 3,000 reservists to help fight the fires. Joining me now is a Canadian journalist living in Australia, Norman Hermant. Norman is a reporter with the Australia Broadcasting Corporation, and he joins me now from Melbourne. Norman, you've had a little reprieve recently with the rain, but how much of Australia is still burning?
Well, they are very concerned, Hal, about these fires because the level of rain is really not enough to completely extinguish them, particularly the fires that are burning ferociously in southern New South Wales and in eastern Victoria, the border area there. They are hoping they can make some progress in the next couple of days because the weekend temperatures are expected to once again be in the high 30s and low 40s here with high winds. So they're expecting another spike day. And this is really the problem, Hal, is that these so-called spike days, spike periods have really been unprecedented for Australia. They've never seen a prolonged period like this where there's been so many hot, windy days, and they just do not have the moisture in the air. That's the real difference when it comes to climate.
Now, there were reports that many of the fires were deliberately set by arsonists. Can you confirm?
One of the reports was that there have been up to 200 reports of arsonists, but a number of journalists have tried to follow this up with police departments who, as you can imagine, are pretty highly stretched. And nobody can find any more than a few handful of reports of arson for deliberately setting fires. So that report is one that I think a lot of people are questioning.
Why were so many of the millions of animals, I mean, we're talking cattle, the koala bears, kangaroos, not saved?
Well, as you can imagine, we're talking huge areas. Some of those, I would caution a little bit. I have seen those figures. Lots of people have seen those figures on the half a billion, 500 million animals may have perished. I did see a little more reporting on that yesterday. That many animals have been affected and driven out of their habitat, if you will. Now, many of those animals who have been driven out of their habitat will eventually perish. So there's no question we could receive that number. In terms of livestock, cattle, and sheep, just on the New South Wales Victoria border area, you're talking about approximately 4 million sheep, maybe over 600,000 or 700,000 beef cattle and dairy cattle.
Let's talk about how many people have lost their homes and businesses. Thousands have been displaced. How are they being helped?
That is one of the good news stories. Obviously, you referred to the Bushfire National Recovery Fund that the Prime Minister announced yesterday, Prime Minister Scott Morrison. That will be funded by at least $2 billion, we're told, over the next 2 years. And he basically said money is no object. We're going to put as much money in there as we need to help the recovery. But in terms of just the grassroots fundraising, I mean, there have been literally tens of millions of dollars raised so far. As you can imagine, I have a lot of friends in Canada, friends and family. They are reaching out. I have friends in the US are reaching out. Some of these donations have been received from around the world. And of course, much like when this happens in Canada, communities are really coming together. People are opening their homes. There's already a program designed to match people who may be out of their homes if they need a bedroom, if people need a place to stay. There's really been people almost falling over themselves to get to the fire zone to bring donated goods. So that's the good news side of the story. There's been a lot of community outreach to help these people who've been so badly affected.
You know, Norman, we remember when Australia sent firefighters to help battle the Kino wildfires in our region in 2017. Alberta's now sent 34 firefighters to help battle the blazes where you are, and in total 87 Canadians. So hopefully we can really help you out at the same time. Norman Hermant, a journalist with the Australia Broadcasting Corporation, thanks for joining me today from Melbourne.
All right, thanks, Al.
Around 150 people showed up for a candlelight vigil Friday night at Winston Churchill High School in Lethbridge to bring awareness to the disappearance of 27-year-old Marshall Awasa. The Lethbridge man has been missing since November 17th. Friday was his birthday. Awasa's burnt-out truck was discovered in BC backcountry near Pemberton a week after his disappearance. Family members say they have not given up and are hoping to expand the search across Canada. RCMP and Cardston have laid charges after a peace officer was threatened with a knife. Police say the incident occurred around 6 p.m. on December 31st outside of the RCMP detachment. Fortunately, there were no injuries. 24-year-old Brendan Kurt Eagle, Speaker of Standoff, is facing numerous charges, including assaulting a police officer. He appeared in Cardston Court earlier today. The Lethbridge Hurricanes were up early this morning giving back to the community. Many of the players were at the Lethbridge Soup Kitchen preparing and dishing out breakfast for those in need in our community. The Lethbridge Soup Kitchen has been providing meals for 35 years. They have more than 700 volunteers who help out annually, including local sports celebrities. And by the way, the next game for the Lethbridge Hurricanes is Friday in Calgary as they take on the Hitmen. Caitlin Addison and Dylan Cousins from the Hurricanes were celebrating their gold medals today following a thrilling 4-3 win over Russia at the World Junior Hockey Championships in the Czech Republic yesterday. Cousins says the team really came together at the right time.
I mean, it's hard to put into words. It's just such a good feeling. You know, we dealt with so much adversity in this tournament, and, you know, the boys just pushed through. They battled hard, and, you know, we came out on top. You know, they had all those power plays. Our penalty kill was huge for us there. You know, they stepped up, and, you know, we just knew that if we were just going to play like that the whole game, it wasn't going to be good. So, you know, we had to watch our sticks more, watch us holding them, and, you know, just play hockey.
You know, it was just such big excitement. You know, everyone cheering on the bench, and I think it's going to be something that we're all going to remember for the rest of our lives. And it feels awesome. So at one point, I don't think I was able to breathe, and I was losing my voice. It's just a great feeling. You know, it's, you know, I only get this once, twice in a lifetime, and for me, you know, to win it 1 out of 2 times, you know, I feel really grateful for that.
Congrats again to Team Canada bringing home the gold medal. Students are back to school today, and with that comes a lot of fresh starts and New Year's resolutions. BCN's Loris Alexander spoke with Lethbridge College students and faculty about what their goals are for 2020.
Happy to be back. I like having a routine, but sometimes it can be a little busy. I think it's just maintaining my grades, balancing a lifestyle between friends and school as well.
I don't do New Year's resolutions because I don't want to have to break them.
I want to do better this semester than I did last semester. I want to get all A's, I guess, and so I'm just going to, I don't know, start off strong and keep going the whole way. It's not really specific, but yeah.
I think for the new year, maybe go to the gym more often, and I mean, it's the time of the year when we get ready for beach season, and how to achieve it. I think just stay committed and set goals and chase them until you get there.
My New Year's resolution for school would be to go harder than I did last semester. I always feel there's room for improvement. So this semester, just keep doing what I've been doing, just add a bit more thrill to it, and can't wait to graduate, honestly. Yeah, just looking forward to that, honestly.
My New Year's resolution this year is to balance my time and enjoy life. So it's called more self-care and enjoy life, and that's my goal.
Tomorrow, Orthodox Ukrainians around the world, including here in Lethbridge, will be celebrating the Orthodox Christmas. A spokesperson with the Holy Trinity Church in Lethbridge explains why they do not celebrate Jesus' birthday on December 25th.
The Eastern Orthodox Church officially celebrates on 2 calendars. One is the Julian calendar, the revised Julian calendar, and the other is the Gregorian calendar. The Gregorian calendar was modified to better suit the civic holidays that were already in place. According to the revised Julian calendar, today's date is December the 25th, is Christmas, or what we call the Nativity of Jesus Christ. In the Orthodox tradition, one prepares for communion the night before. The celebration really is Eucharistic. Sunday morning when communion is served, we will be having a comp line at 6:30 p.m. That is followed actually by a potluck at 5 p.m. Tomorrow is January the 7th. We call it the Nativity of Christ, and the liturgy starts at 10 a.m.
The tradition of celebrating an Orthodox Christmas will continue on January 7th until the year 2101, when the Gregorian date changes to January 8th. Many Iranian Canadians danced and cheered in the streets of Toronto over the weekend on hearing the news that a top Iranian general was killed. An American drone strike authorized by U.S. President Donald Trump killed Qasem Soleimani on Thursday in Baghdad, Iraq. Soleimani was the head of Iraq's Quds Force, a group which has been recognized as a terrorist organization by the Canadian government. Those who danced say they hoped this represents a rebirth for Iran.
By the people of Iran!
We are here to support the Iranian uprising against the regime. It's a terrorist regime. We are going to ask international governments, all government, to stop appeasing Iranian regime. The more appeasement, the more blood. I believe every Iranian, Iraqi, Lebanon, Yemeni, Syrian, the real people, not the regime, so happy to see this man is killed. We are so delighted to see this man is eliminated. He was a master terrorist.
Elimination of the terrorists is bringing peace and hope to people.
Brigadier General Ismail Ghani was appointed commander of the Quds Force on the day that Soleimani was killed. A big talking point in the world today is climate change. Now, I recently had a chance to ask economics professor Ross McKittrick from the University of Guelph if he was to run into Swedish climate activist Greta Thunberg, what question he would ask her.
If you could go back in time, would you have prevented all this fossil fuel consumption from having taken place and leave people in the pre-industrial poverty that we had? I mean, what exactly do you want here? Do you want people to go back to the kind of desperate poverty that we had in the centuries leading up to the Industrial Revolution?
Catch the entire interview with Dr. McKittrick talking climate change and how he says there's still a lot of misconceptions out there regarding climate. That's coming up after Business News. Michael Zwagstra is an author and a high school teacher in Manitoba. Michael says there's a movement afoot in some schools where some teachers are trying to push an agenda. He says politicizing classrooms can sometimes be a very dangerous practice.
I think it's important for teachers to provide information, to provide different perspectives to students, and I'm all in favor of bringing in contrary information, both pro-oil sands and contra, opposed to oil sands, but make sure it's done in a balanced way so that students are still able to make up their own minds.
Catch the full interview with Mr. Zwagstra talking teachers and politics coming up in the second half of our show. It was on this day that Joan of Arc was born. Inventor Samuel Morse unveils the telegraph, and an attacker clubs figure skater Nancy Kerrigan. This is Today in History for January the 6th.
January 6th, 1412. According to tradition, Joan of Arc, France's national heroine and a Catholic saint, is born in the village of Domremy. 1838. Inventor Samuel Morse gives his first public demonstration of the telegraph, dots, dashes, and all, in Morristown, New Jersey. 1942. Pan Am's Pacific Clipper arrives in New York, becoming the first commercial airplane to complete a round-the-world flight. 1994. An attacker clubs figure skater Nancy Kerrigan on her right leg. Among the men later sentenced to prison, the ex-husband of Kerrigan's rival, Tonya Harding. And 1993. The world loses two artistic greats. Jazz trumpeter Dizzy Gillespie dies at age 75, and ballet dancer Rudolf Nureyev dies at age 54. Today in History, January 6th. Sophia Manos, The Associated Press.
Ray Barnett had a vision to see the young people of Africa reach their full potential when he launched the first African children's choir in 1984. Today, hundreds of young people are serving God around the world as a result of the transformation it's had on their lives. Charlotte Diorio looks back on the impact it had on her life, being a part of the very first children's choir.
Since the African Children's Choir was first launched 36 years ago, a whole generation of leaders and impactors have emerged from this remarkable ministry across the globe. The vision of the African Children's Choir founder Ray Barnett was to show the potential of the young people of this continent. That dream has resulted in hundreds, if not thousands, of them achieving what seemed impossible both in ministry and in the professional world.
They're doctors, they're lawyers, they're teachers, they're growing up, they're doing great work themselves in Africa. Some of them work in other parts of the world, and they're absolutely outstanding.
Charlotte Diorio remembers what it was like as a little girl from Uganda joining the first ever choir.
The first concerts we did were in Vancouver at Glad Tidings, and we were received very well. We sang our hearts out. We so much wanted to please. We had standing ovations. People just seemed to just be drawn to the choir, and afterwards they would come and give us big hugs, big smiles. People would get emotional.
Years later, Charlotte remarkably gained her master's degree and wanted to give something back to the choir to become their teacher.
Once you realize the magnitude of what had happened, of what this organization had done, I mean, how can you repay them? I knew certainly I would never be able to do that financially, but I definitely knew that I had to give back somehow. And so I had been wanting to come back and help somehow, and when the opportunity presented itself for me to come back on tour, I jumped on it right away.
Charlotte is now married with 3 children living in the States. Her husband is a US Marine who works in the Pentagon. Ray Barnett, affectionately known to many as Daddy Ray, was able to walk her down the aisle. She reflects on the impact Daddy Ray has had on her life, as well as so many other African children.
He just embraced not only me, but all the children. And I remember, being on the first choir, he would look right at me and he would tell me I was special. And years later, I know he meant it. And he would say to us, "You are princesses and you're princes." And he would say, "You are world citizens." And he'd say, "You're going to dine with kings and queens." And that's crazy, but he was right.
Peter Wooding for the Global News Alliance.
That's a beautiful, powerful story. We had sun mixed with cloud and mild for the first week of January. Now, if you prefer the cooler temperatures and some of the white stuff, more of it is on the way. Complete weather details are on deck. We had a mainly cloudy day in Lethbridge today. Tonight, a chance of flurries developing with a low near -8. Tomorrow, more snow developing with a high of only -4. The mercury increases to 3 degrees on Wednesday with a chance of snow mixed with rain. The mercury plummets on Thursday as we should see a high of only -14. Friday overcast but warming up to -2. A cool and snowy weekend is shaping up. Saturday and Sunday expect snow and a high of only -19 for both days. Checking the almanac, the average high for this time of year is -2 and an average low of -14. The highest temperature on this date was recorded in 2003 at 13 degrees, and the record low, a chilly -35 in 1996. Sunrise was at 8:28, sunset at 4:46. The days are getting longer. Let's see how tomorrow's shaping up across the country now. Expect rain at 10 degrees in Victoria, BC, showers at 9 degrees for Vancouver. Expect light snow and -8 for Calgary on Tuesday. A chance of flurries at -11 for Edmonton. It should be mainly sunny at -13 in Regina. Sunshine and -15 is on tap for Saskatoon tomorrow. Partly cloudy at -14 for Winnipeg. Mainly cloudy and 3 degrees for Toronto. A mixture of sun and cloud at -2 for Ottawa. Overcast at -3 degrees for Montreal on Tuesday. In the Maritimes, expect flurries at -2 in Fredericton, New Brunswick. Periods of snow and 0 for Halifax, Nova Scotia. Flurries at -3 for Charlottetown, PEI. And in St. John's, Newfoundland, expect snow and a high of only -3 for tomorrow. A new report from RBC says our economy could look a lot different by the year 2030. It says our economy will be focused more on green technology and an aging population. The report predicts it will cost at least $140 billion to build new seniors' residences or nursing homes to house an expected 650,000 seniors by the year 2030. This is up from the current 450,000. A 35-year veteran of Canada's oil and gas industry is hoping helium will become the next natural resource boom for Western Canada. Marlon McDougall of North American Helium says the element is in high demand without the headaches that come with oil and gas, such as environmental criticism. Demand for the gas, once used primarily by the military and party balloons, has been rising, creating shortages around the world. Saskatchewan produced helium from wells for about a decade, 50 years ago, before slumping prices brought it to an end. The apparent resolution to a battle for the Bay is boosting the company's share value. HBC shares were up nearly 10% on the TSX after a group led by Executive Chairman Richard Baker hiked its offer for the retailer to $11 a share. That is up from the previous offer of $10.30. The higher bid won the approval of opponent Catalyst Capital, which said the lower offer undervalued the company. A shareholder vote on the revised deal is now expected to be held next month. Media Central says the acquisition of Vancouver's Georgia Straight newspaper will help it become the largest publisher of alternative weeklies in Canada. The Toronto-based company says the deal for Georgia Straight and affiliated publications is valued at $1.25 million. Media Central Chief Executive Brian Kalish says the Vancouver publication brings more than 50 years of respected award-winning journalism to a loyal audience of 4.5 million. It says the deal, along with a recent acquisition of Now magazine, will extend its reach to 6.5 million readers every month. Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was up 39 points on the day to 17,105. The Dow was up almost 69 points to 28,703. The S&P 500 was up 11 points to 3246. The Nasdaq was up almost 51 points on the day to 9,071. Oil was down 22 cents on the day to 62.83 per barrel. Natural gas was up 2 cents to $2.15. Gold was down 8 cents to $15.6566 an ounce, and silver was unchanged at $18.15 per ounce. Wheat is at $229 per metric ton, barley's at $232, canola's at $4.69, and corn is at $282 per metric ton. Live cattle were up $2.55 to $127.43. Feeder cattle were up $4.08 to $147.83. Lean hogs were up 8 cents to $69.23. The Canadian dollar was up slightly on the day to 77.15 US. Recapping one of our top stories this hour, the Australian wildfires have now claimed more than 24 lives, more than 2,000 homes have been destroyed, and millions of animals have also perished. Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison said their government is committing an extra $2 billion to firefighting efforts. So far, Canada has sent 87 firefighters to help battle the blazes in Australia. Sometimes integrating politics in the classroom can be quite tricky and damaging, especially when this ideology is one-sided. That's according to a Manitoba high school teacher and author, Michael Zwagstra, who gives us his thoughts next. But first, here's a look what's happening in and around your community.
Here's your Bridge City News community calendar. Lethbridge residents are invited to an open house Thursday, January 9th between 5 and 8 p.m. at the Westminster Hall. This meeting is to give residents an opportunity to learn about future redevelopment policies and to provide feedback. Topics will include secondary suites, multifamily housing, building and site design, transportation, and utilities and servicing. Kid-friendly activities will be available. For more information, visit lethbridge.ca or call 311. Lethbridge Legal Guidance is a nonprofit society offering free legal advice to low-income Southern Albertans. It holds clinics on Tuesdays from 5 to 7 p.m. by appointment only. Some of the areas the society assists in include family, criminal, traffic, immigration, EI, and other issues. For more information, call 403-380-6338 or email lethbridgelegalguidance@telus.net. Looking for a fun place where you and your kids can play? Come for a fun family night to the Family Center in downtown Lethbridge, Thursday evenings from 4:30 to 6:30 p.m. beginning January 9th. Me and My Family promotes learning through play and provides a safe place for kids to explore through physical activity, imagination, and creativity. For more information, visit famcenter.ca. And that's your Bridge City News community calendar.
Michael Zwagstra is a public high school teacher, a research fellow with the Atlantic Institute for Market Studies, and author of a new book called A Sage on the Stage, Common Sense Reflections on Teaching and Learning. Welcome back to BCN, Michael.
Well, thank you very much for having me. Always a pleasure.
Now, what can you tell me about your newest book?
Well, my new book is called A Sage on the Stage, Common Sense Reflections on Teaching and Learning. And it's a collection of some of my best articles over the years on the different aspects of education policy. everything from the importance of content knowledge to the need to have higher academic standards to debunking some of the most common education fads that are out there. And so the book is organized into 10 chapters based on different themes, and the articles are sorted accordingly. There's an introduction to each section, providing some context, and it's really intended to give parents and teachers and anyone interested in public education a better understanding of what's going on, so that way they can ask for the changes that they want to see.
Michael, some people believe our public school system is in dire need of some tweaking. Here in Alberta, we've heard complaints from some parents and students that some teachers are using test questions and curriculum that are clearly aimed at vilifying the oil and gas industry. Now, this is some form of politicizing the classroom and indoctrinating students?
Well, this is a concern, and I've seen the test excerpts, and the test excerpt in question talked about identifying so-called valid arguments against the oil sands. That's a value judgment. That shouldn't be a test question. I'm concerned any time that there's a particular position that a teacher takes and pushes on students. I think it's important for teachers to provide information, to provide different perspectives to students, and I'm all in favor of bringing in contrary information, both pro-oil sands and contra, opposed to oil sands, but make sure it's done in a balanced way so that students are still able to make up their own minds.
You know, I used to be the morning man at the radio station up in Fort McMurray, as they used to call it, Fort McMurray. And oil sands, how you refer to up there, people who are against it call it tar sands. You can always tell where somebody's coming from a lot of times when they say tar sands. Now, your book has a chapter entitled The Overhyped Promises of Technology. Now, is all of this new technology making us smarter or perhaps maybe not as bright?
Well, the reality is that there's a lot of emphasis that's put on computers and different types of technology in classrooms. But the research that's been done on this indicates that it has a limited impact on student achievement. There's no evidence that giving every student a laptop or an iPad, or particularly with younger grades, having them on the screen, there's no evidence that that actually makes any significant difference in terms of their learning. If anything, with younger students in particular, it harms their learning because they're losing the important practice and skill development that they need of basic things such as being able to write and to read, and it's just not the same when you're looking at a screen. So I do raise some concerns about the excessive focus on technology in the book.
You know, it's interesting. I'm glad you brought that up about writing. I work on a computer all day long, you know, helping to put their newscast together here, always on the keyboard. And then when I actually physically pull out a pen and piece of paper and I try to write a sentence, not print, but write a sentence, my cursive handwriting is terrible because, I mean, practice makes perfect. And if, you know, you don't use it, you lose it, I guess. Should we go old school and maybe teach our kids more about handwriting instead of being on the keyboards all the time?
Well, certainly for younger students, the early years, kindergarten to grade 4, I don't think they should be using computers at all, or at least very, very little. They should be focusing on printing, and yes, they should learn handwriting. Cursive writing is an important skill. As students get older, when you get to the middle years, I would allow some computer use, and I would allow significantly more at the high school level because, yes, at that level, I think they should be able to type their essays. But the fact is, when you're in grade 1, your hands don't even fit on the keyboard properly. They get enough screen time at home on iPads and devices and all that sort of thing. I'm not one of those that thinks that they should be on a screen for large chunks of the day. So I would much rather have a lot less screen time, particularly with younger students.
How is your cursive handwriting? Still pretty good?
Mine has never been very good. I do use it, but I've never claimed that I have the best handwriting.
Okay. Now, you wrote an article entitled, Brainwashed Students Are Not Critical Thinkers. Now, what did you mean by critical thinking, and how does this needs to be tied in with something called content knowledge?
Critical thinking is the ability to look at an argument or look at a position that someone has and be able to analyze it using information from different perspectives and then coming to your own educated opinion about it. Critical thinking is often presented in school as this abstract notion that we need to teach the skill of critical thinking. But the reality is that critical thinking is linked to content knowledge. You need to know something about a topic in order to think critically about it. There's a common saying that I use is that ignorant people don't think critically, ever. There's never a time where you're in a conversation with a group of people talking about something and then someone who has no idea what you're talking about comes in and gives their opinion, you're never going to say to them, wow, that was insightful, good use of your critical thinking skills. You're likely to say, you know, you need to know something about this topic before you can give me any educated opinion about it. And so I make the case in the book that students need to learn facts. They need to have information in their heads. They need to have knowledge. It's not enough just to say that they're going to Google and find the information that way. They need to have information in their brains in order to be able to think critically about any topic that's in front of them.
You're right that much of our Canadian social studies curriculum lacks emphasis on specific historical facts and events. Instead, students focus on broad themes such as diversity and environmental stewardship. Is that a good thing?
No, I think that it's important to, now I should say, of course, environmental stewardship and diversity, those are good things, but focusing on those and reducing the emphasis on facts and knowledge and dates and events, that is not helpful. If we want to have true environmental stewardship and a real appreciation of diversity, we need to know about the rich history of our country. It's all well and good to talk in general terms about how much we like diversity. It's another thing entirely when we have some historical knowledge about past immigration patterns in Canada and knowing about Clifford Sifton, who was the immigration minister when Wilfrid Laurier was prime minister, and how they started settling the West. Knowing those facts, that gives you a real appreciation of diversity, not just simply having a theme where students are going to investigate it in ways that might perhaps interest them. You need to have the facts and the knowledge in your head in order to be able to do any of these deeper themes.
Apparently, some provinces are now weaving in a lot of the LGBTQ2+ issues, like you said, diversity, climate change, with each subject in the curriculum. But let me ask you something. Whatever happened to reading, writing, and arithmetic?
Well, those are the things that really matter, and I would say that having an accurate understanding of our history, accurate understanding of science, these are the things that make it possible to think about all these other subjects. You can't have a proper discussion about climate change if you don't know something about meteorology and how weather works. You can't have an educated discussion on LGBT issues if you don't know some of the history in Canada and some of the challenges around that. You need to have the facts in your brain. And my concern with the excessive focus on social justice is that we're short-circuiting the learning process. It's all well and good to want to do social justice and we want to change the world. We want to make students change agents and all that sort of thing. But they need to learn some things first. And it's a lot more authentic and real if you're choosing to get involved politically as a result of the knowledge that you've acquired, the skills that you've learned, and now you want to get involved. Great, I'm all for that.
Let me ask you something. What are your thoughts on Greta Thunberg?
I think she should spend more time in school, and I would encourage any 16-year-old stay in school and stay focused. That would be my immediate reaction. I'm not in favor of strikes, as they're being called, where students are skipping class. Frankly, whatever the issue is, I think it's important to be in class. And if there's an issue, whether it's climate or something else that's really important to students, do it on Saturday or do it on the weekend. Give up some of your own time, and that shows that you're really serious about something, as opposed to having a whole lot of students skipping classes.
Can you share what is happening with Discovery Math, a method of teaching that has become a little controversial and some say quite ineffective?
Well, Discovery Math is an approach to math instruction where students are encouraged to come up with their own ways of solving problems. And so instead of drilling for practice, instead of learning the standard algorithms for adding, subtracting, multiplying, and dividing, the Discovery approach has students essentially come up with many of their own problem-solving methods. And we see this in some of the math textbooks that are being used. That's why if you look at the Math Makes Sense textbook series, which is a misnomer of a title because it doesn't make sense, but it shows you virtually everything except the standard algorithms, all these different potential ways of solving math questions. But it's convoluted, it's confusing, students find it very frustrating, and it's just not a good way to learn math. You need to learn the basics, you need to learn sequentially, step by step.
Well, the times tables, that was a big thing when I was a kid. What percentage of kids today are still taught their times tables?
Depends what province you're in. I mean, the fortunate thing is that as a result of a lot of pushback from parents in Alberta, the Alberta government a few years ago did put it in the curriculum again that students have to learn their times tables, although I think it should be at an earlier grade level than what it is now. Some provinces require it, some don't, but it's all about the emphasis that we choose to put on it. And something like that, I would put as early as possible, and I would have it emphasized that you have to have it completely memorized. Because if you're struggling with, if you don't know 5 times 6 is 30, good luck doing a complex algebraic equation where you have to do multiple steps.
So getting back to the basics, help build that basic is that we all need, right, in our lives. How do today's math students compare with students from 20 or 30 years ago?
Well, the answer to that question is if you look at some of the older math textbooks, you get the answer pretty quickly. You see a lot more advanced math that was being done. Uh, you had some of those basics masters, and so students were able to, for example, go on to higher level algebra at an earlier point. And again, a key thing is you look at some of the older math textbooks. Go back 20 or 30 years, and they show you how to do math questions. That's why a lot of teachers, and I've done this myself. I don't teach math now, but I used to. And I remember that if I wanted to get students to actually learn how to do math, I pulled out the old math textbook and I used that. I didn't use the new textbooks because they don't show you how to do it.
Now, here in Alberta, there's been talk of giving equal funding to private schools, and there's been some pushback from the public school system on that. What are your thoughts?
My philosophy has always been that money should follow the students, and most provinces do provide at least partial funding for families that choose to go to independent schools, and I'm in favor of that because it's a choice that the family should be able to have. The reality is that if the government were to stop providing funding to independent schools, it would actually end up costing the system more money because all those students would all have to immediately be absorbed into the public system, where the funding per student is at a higher level. And so the reality is that independent or private schools actually save governments a lot of money because they don't get the same level of operational funding that the public school students do.
Michael, let's talk about tests and exams for just a moment. Some say we need standardized provincial achievement tests. Others say that we don't. What are your thoughts?
Well, I'm in favor of having standardized tests. I think at the provincial level, it should be a test that all students write at the same time, and then it's centrally marked. And the reason is then we can use that as a benchmark to find out how students are doing. Most provinces do have some standardized testing. I know Alberta does, for example. Provinces that have moved away from it, such as Manitoba, we've seen a decline in student achievement as measured by the recent PISA, the Program for International Student Assessment. That's an example of a standardized test. And so when you don't have standardized testing, it's much harder to know where things are at in the system. And so I'm in favor of having it. I'm not in favor of, obviously, of having standardized testing be the only thing we have. Of course, teacher-created tests are extremely important and should be worth the bulk of the mark. But at the same time, I do support having some standardized testing.
Let me ask you something. Some teachers actually, I don't know if it's pressure from parents or maybe even the school board, but they refuse to fail students. Don't give them an F and they refuse to fail them. It's like we'll keep moving them along through the system. What are your thoughts on that? Like when I was a kid, I would fail and I would learn and I would study harder and then, maybe pass the next test.
Well, the default should be that a pass should be earned. And when a student certainly, and it depends obviously on the particular circumstances of the student. I'm certainly not in favor of any blanket no-fail policy. I'm also not in favor of a rigid system where you're slightly below and you're going to be held back a grade automatically. I think it should be done on a case-by-case basis, that it should be evaluated. And obviously, the older the student and the higher the grade level they're in, the higher their standards should be. So certainly at high school, grades 9 to 12, absolutely every credit should be a straightforward, you either pass or you fail in terms of you have to actually earn the credit. Obviously, when you go below that grade level, it's on a case-by-case basis. But obviously, the default should be that if you move from one level to the next, you should have mastered the previous level.
Now, where do you see our education system maybe 10 or 20 years from now?
It's hard to say. I'm hoping that that some of the areas that we've seen some declines, I would like to see some improvement. I'm hoping that there's going to be a push to having some more content in the curriculum and a recognition of the importance of these basics and of knowledge and moving it in that direction. There are some hopeful signs currently in Alberta. with new provincial government. They've certainly indicated, the Premier has, and so is the Education Minister, that they would like to see higher standards. And Alberta historically has been a very high-performing province, and so I'm hoping this is an area where Alberta leads the way in moving away from some of the progressive education approach that we've seen recently.
Michael Swagstra, high school teacher and author of A Sage on the Stage, Common Sense Reflections on Teaching and Learning. Thanks for your time today.
You're welcome. Always happy to be with you.
Much of our last federal election focused around climate change and how to fight it. How did our political leaders do when it comes to sharing climate science facts accurately, or perhaps maybe just making things up along the way? Joining me now to talk a bit about it is Dr. Ross McKittrick, Professor of Economics at the University of Guelph. Thanks for joining me here today on Bridge City News.
My pleasure, Hal.
Now, Ross, more than 11,000 scientists from 153 countries around the world, including 409 scientists from Canada, signed an open letter declaring a climate emergency. What was your reaction when you heard about this?
Well, I looked at the paper that they distributed that made the case for there being a crisis. And the surprising thing is a lot of the data that they show, it's things like world GDP has gone up, population's gone up, energy consumption has gone up, food production has gone up. They list all these statistics and then they say, this is a crisis. And I just don't see the problem here. I mean, in the past 20 years, it's true, incomes have gone up around the world and we've cut the number of people living in extreme poverty. The number has fallen by half. And that's been good news. This is a case of colliding perspectives, I guess. I think this has been a tremendous advance in human prosperity over the past 20 years. And yes, there have been some small changes in the climate, although much smaller than the rhetoric would lead you to believe. But overall, I think the last 20 or 30 years have been anything but a crisis. They've actually been pretty good for the world.
Now, last summer you wrote an open letter yourself to then MP Lisa Raitt, who had retweeted one of your articles on climate change, but after receiving a lot of flack, I understand she deleted the tweet and apologized. Can you share a bit more of that story?
Yeah, I wrote an op-ed last summer where I was telling the story of an American scientist who did a lot of work on extreme weather patterns, and his work is highly cited in the scientific community. And it really presents the conclusion that the historical data doesn't show increases in hurricanes, floods, droughts, the typical measures of extreme weather. And those are the conclusions in the expert panel reports. Everything is in the mainstream of what he said. And yet, for saying it, he had been attacked by politicians. He's been attacked by people in academia. He'd endured quite a lot of flack for that. The article that I wrote, which really just told this story, it got a lot of retweets, as you mentioned, but then people like Lisa Raitt, when she retweeted it, she took a lot of flack for it to the point where she backed off from the whole story. So I wrote her an open letter to say, do you see the connection here? This is exactly the pattern. All you've done is retweet information that's out there in the expert reports and in the academic scientific literature, and you're being shouted down for doing that. The lesson here is you have to be willing to put this information out there and not be intimidated by it, not silence yourself and censor yourself. And I'm afraid a lot of politicians these days have given up trying to do that. They've fallen silent on these issues, and as a result, there's a public misimpression on issues like climate and extreme weather that isn't being corrected.
So, Ross, what do you say to people that tell you, you know what, you're a professor of economics at the University of Guelph, you're not a climate scientist, so why should we listen to you?
Well, two things. A lot of my work is in applied statistics, and I have published a lot in the climate science literature doing statistics and data analysis. But on the specific issue of extreme weather, I've done very little of that work myself, but the reports are there for anyone to read. So when the IPCC reported a few years ago that in the 20th century and early 21st century, there's no compelling evidence of an increase in the extent or severity of flooding in Canada or the United States. So it's is there, it's in their own words, and yet time after time I hear politicians and journalists saying we're facing a crisis of increased flooding in Canada because of climate change. Well, they have no basis for saying that. Environment Canada doesn't assert that. They don't, Environment Canada doesn't say extreme precipitation is increasing in the country. Urban flooding has gone up in areas where the drainage systems haven't been maintained properly, or there's been urban sprawl without proper attention to where the runoff is going to go. But it's not a climate issue. So I would just say anyone can read those reports. You don't have to be a professor of climate science to read the reports. They're in plain language, and I wish more people would.
So are politicians simply misinformed on climate facts, or they may be stretching the truth a little bit to fit their narrative or agenda?
Well, that's an interesting question, because presumably there are people whose job it is to sit the politicians down and say, okay, you guys asked for an expert panel to look at this, and this is what the report said. And I assume those briefings take place. What happens, though, between that session where the briefing takes place and what happens when the politician is at the microphone, there seems to be a complete change in the message. And what happens is a lot of slogans get inserted. So then we get the usual slogans about floods and storms and droughts and tornadoes. You know, when a tornado hit the city of Ottawa last year, a lot of politicians just went out and said, well, this must be a sign of climate change, instead of saying, well, I wonder what the expert panel reports have to say about tornadoes. And if they had checked, they would have seen that there's been no upward trend in tornado activity in North America for many, many decades. And this is not something that scientists connect to climate change in that way.
How about some of the wildfires? I mean, Alberta, we've experienced quite a few of them too in the last couple of years. Look what's happening in California right now as well.
Well, we have long-term data on forest fires in North America, especially in the United States. The data go back to the beginning of the 20th century. The 1920s and 30s were a period of very high wildfire activity in the U.S. A lot of area was burned due to forest fires, and that has come down dramatically. Now, that's through fire suppression activity. And similarly in Canada, we have a lot of natural forest fires and then a lot of fire suppression activity. So at this point, it's a bit hard to detect a climate signal in that kind of data, because a lot of what we see reflects active measures to preserve forest areas from forest fire. But nevertheless, the federal government does maintain forest fire records for Canada, and we've seen since the 1990s there's actually been a slight trend downwards in the number of forest fires and the total area burned.
Now, one of the controversies of the last federal election, Ross, was the fact that Prime Minister Justin Trudeau used 2 planes to campaign with. He justified it by pointing out that he purchased carbon offsets. Can you explain exactly how that works?
Well, you can buy from, I guess, some companies an offset, which means that your activity, flying in multiple planes in that instance, generates a lot of greenhouse gas emissions. And these companies will engage in tree planting or activities like that in other countries, which will cause an equivalent amount of carbon dioxide to be taken out of the atmosphere through new tree growth. Now, can you really be sure that they do what they say they're going to do? Well, it's anyone's guess. I mean, these carbon offset businesses, it's a convenience for people in the West, like celebrities with giant yachts and private jets that want to fly off to their conferences to talk about the climate crisis. And then when it's pointed out to them that that's kind of hypocritical what they're doing, they will then say, well, I bought carbon credits. So okay, fine. If we all want to live by the fiction of these climate offsets and carbon credits, then it's an easy way out. In that instance, though, the Prime Minister flying around in 2 jets, it's a great illustration in an election campaign of the dilemma that even the people that talk about this as if it's a giant crisis, they certainly don't live like it is and they don't act like it is.
Now, the Green Party and the NDP made some pretty big proposals in the election campaign, things like net zero emissions by the year 2030, no more pipelines, shutting down the oil and gas industry, and replacing all of that with green technology. Is this actually achievable?
Well, anything is achievable if you're willing to impose drastic hardship on people. I think the bigger question is in climate policy, we keep running into a problem that the cure is worse than the disease. If we think about what's going to happen between now and 2030 as a result of climate change, I predict it'll look a lot like what's happened over the past 10 or 20 years, which is we will still have the usual run of weather that we're used to. And we're not going to experience this crisis that everybody is talking about. We can live with the kind of weather and climate that we've had for many, many centuries in Canada. We've learned that we can adapt to it. And in fact, a lot of the studies even suggest that Canada will come out a little ahead from climate change because we'll have longer growing seasons and a slightly larger area available for agriculture. But the kinds of measures that you describe, I mean, shutting down pipelines, shutting down whole industries, raising the cost of energy to unaffordable levels, we know what that'll do. It'll impose incredible hardship on people and do a lot of damage, and for no conceivable benefit. So the fact that you've got a couple of mainstream political parties proposing to do this, I just think it speaks to the strange times that we're in, that people are thinking that way.
Now, you write about a friend of yours in Eastern Europe who has an interesting observation about the assumption we tend to make that the whole political correctness problem was imposed on us from the outside. Can you share a bit more about that?
Yeah, so at the time of the controversy about the newspaper article, this was a friend of mine who was chatting with me, and he said this whole climate issue reminds him of growing up in Eastern Europe and the heavy hand of political correctness that they lived with under the Soviet system, and everybody was afraid to say anything. And then he added this point that people think that it was imposed on us from the outside. In the country that he was in, it was quite onerous and oppressive what they had, but he said it wasn't imposed on us from the outside. We imposed it on ourselves. He said at a certain point, people just stopped being willing to talk about the issues that were there in front of them, and so it was his way of encouraging me to write the kind of article that I had, and also to I think express his feeling that this is the danger, that if people stop talking about these issues honestly, then we end up imposing political correctness on ourselves, and we saw how badly that went for people in Eastern Europe.
Some people believe that climate change is a result of human interaction or what humans have been doing on this planet. Other people say, no, it's cyclical, it's Mother Nature, it's quite common. Where do you stand on that issue?
Well, that's a big question. I think the easiest thing is to say that it's both. We have changed the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere over the past century at a fairly rapid pace, reflecting the widespread use of fossil fuels. And so in principle, we should expect that that's going to have an effect on the climate system. Is it a big effect or a small effect? I'm very familiar there with the arguments on each side. And I think there's a lot of evidence, including a lot of new evidence that's just come out in the last few years, that the effect is on the small side of what climate models predict. And the other question, is it harmful or not? Is it good or bad for the economy as a whole? And on that one of the interesting things is when the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has looked at the economic side of this and what are the economic effects of climate changes, they have said that even if the climate models are right and we get all the warming that they say we might get, the effects on the economy are still going to be small relative to all the other changes that we're going to experience with technology and society and aging and all the other things that will affect us over the next 100 years. The effects from climate change themselves will actually be on the small scale compared to all of that.
So what are your thoughts on the teenage Swedish climate activist Greta Thunberg, who came to Canada recently saying we have to do our part when it comes to climate change?
Well, I think her message was quite a bit more radical than that, because we could say we actually have already been doing our part about climate change. I'm really puzzled by that whole movement. I mean, to the extent that I've looked at the things that she's saying, it's kind of boilerplate environmentalist scold material. It's just everything you do is wrong and you should feel badly about it, and nothing you could ever do would be enough for someone like that. And she seems to have an enormous organization behind her. I don't know, or maybe it's all organic and it's just a grassroots campaign, but people seem awfully receptive to a message that to me doesn't make a whole lot of sense, and I think is actually advocating ideas that would be very harmful if they were implemented. A question I would have for someone like Greta Thunberg is, over the past 150 years, we've used a lot of fossil fuels. At the same time, we've made life better for billions of people around the world. Should we undo all of that? If you could go back in time, would you have prevented all this fossil fuel consumption from having taken place and leave people in the pre-industrial poverty that we had? I mean, what exactly do you want here? Do you want people to go back to the kind of desperate poverty that we had in the centuries leading up to the Industrial Revolution?
I'll hook you two up so you can have that conversation. Dr. Ross McKittrick, Professor of Economics at the University of Guelph, thanks a lot for your time today.
My pleasure.
On behalf of all of us here at BCN, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless. Thanks so much for watching.